On today's episode of Locked On Lightning, we're continuing our player reviews. And on today's episode, we take a look at the season at Tyler Motte. How did he fare in his first season in Tampa Bay, as well as will we see him next season? All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Tanker. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $100 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. On this episode, we're continuing our player reviews, taking a look at the season of Tyler Motte. What do we think about how he did this season? Check it out. Stick around. As well as we talk about, will we see him back in Tampa Bay next season? As well as what we do with every player review segment. We wrap things up with expectations for next season. But before we jump into any of those topics, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Go ahead and follow us wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube, so subscribe to our channel there. And you can find more of my work at boltsbythebay.com. So we're talking about Tyler Motte, and, you know, I will admit some of these player reviews are not going to be as, maybe, what's the right word, exciting as maybe a Stamkos or, you know, some of the ones that we've previously done with Nick Paul, Brandon Hagel, Anthony Cirelli, those. But I think that regardless of the excitement levels behind every player review, I think it is only right that we do every player to a certain degree on this team. You know, if we didn't really get a good look at him or whoever, you know, is in the conversation of who you would bring up, you know, maybe we might mention them at some point in the offseason if they are still with the Lightning. But other than that, that's, you know, for the most part, I think we're doing everybody on the team. I mean, we just got done doing Anthony Duclair. If you didn't check out that episode, go ahead and do it, please. I had a good time, and I love all the reactions and interactions I get to have with all of you in the YouTube comments. So Tyler Motte, and I'm going to start things off by kind of clearing the air, because I've said this throughout the course of the season when talking about Tyler Motte, and I think we need, I want to clear up the air here, because I think that there's maybe some misconceptions about what I mean when I say that I kind of figured there would have been a little bit more scoring to his game this year. But let me preface that real quick by talking about his stats. So this season, he played 69 games, scored 6 goals, and had 9 points. His plus minus, which I kind of forewarned everybody for the most part when we started these player reviews with Nick Paul, that really the plus minuses for the most part across the board weren't going to be that good. So really, all it is really a testament to the fact that this team did not have a good year defensively for the most part. I will say the one thing that sticks out to me from Tyler Motte being a fourth line forward, averaging about close to 12 and a half minutes per game, is that he had, out of his 6 goals, he had 2 game winners, which, you know what, take that as you will. Does that count him necessarily clutch? Not really. I mean, off the top of my head, I can't tell you who exactly on this team ranks the highest with game-winning goals. But I will tell you, going back to the point I made before, that, and to answer your question, it was Braden Point with 12. And then Kucherov and Stamkos had 6. To get back to what I started talking about before, with when I talk about Tyler Motte, I've said in episodes past when I've referenced him that I've been disappointed throughout the course of the season with him because I really thought we were going to see a little bit more offense to his game. And maybe some of that could be attributed to the fact that he's been on the fourth line all year. And if you look at his past seasons, his career high in goals is 9, with his career points in a season is 19. So not a ton of scoring. And what I said before, I didn't expect Tyler Motte to come into Tampa Bay and automatically become a 40-point guy or a 10-goal score or a 15-goal scorer. No, absolutely not. I kind of figured, though, we would have seen a little bit more to his game given the fact who he had around him on this team. And that's what I really meant throughout the course of the season. I feel like every time I talked about or remotely even mentioned Tyler Motte, that there was one or two of you, rightfully so. I mean, obviously, you're more than welcome to comment on little things that I may say and may or may not be getting wrong. Absolutely. But here I am at the end of the season during the summer, kind of clearing it up if I haven't been able to at all. I don't know. We've done a ton of episodes this year, so I have no idea. But yeah, you kind of figure with any person that has shown any kind of life when it comes to their offensive game, that you would kind of figure when they get to Tampa Bay, with what the Lightning have for the most part as a base in their top 9, you would kind of figure that someone of that nature, someone like a Tyler Motte, regardless of what kind of player you pick him as, and I still think that there is kind of some hope, if you want to call it that we could possibly see him have somewhat of a type of season like the one that I would expect out of him. You would kind of figure that a guy like that coming into this environment with all the tools and weapons around him, that there would be somewhat of a little bit of life to their offensive game. Now, we have to take into consideration, of course, like we have really had for some of the other players that we have discussed on these player reviews, the Tanner Jeannots. I'm drawing a blank now. I think we talked about Nick Paul kind of in the same class in terms of if maybe he had other players around him or was moved up in the lineup, you would kind of see a little bit of a better season out of him. Not saying that he didn't have a good season, but like a Mikey Esamon, and we talk about Nick Pervix a little bit in that realm as well. Tanner Jeannot, that was really one of the main players that we discussed as well when it fell into that category. And I think Tyler Motte kind of does too when you talk about it, when you kind of play the game that we all love to play in our heads when it comes to this Lightning game. When we sit down, we look at the roster and we try to put together the best lines that would not only win hockey games but make everybody successful. And I can't help but imagine, especially next season, and we'll get obviously more into that in the second segment when we talk about will we even see him next season, because he is a UFA this summer. With what I have laid out in these player reviews, and if you haven't really been able to get to any of them, please go ahead and start from the beginning, because they do all. There is a theme that I'm rolling through here with. I'm laying out both scenarios, whether Stamkos comes back or not. I'm laying out both and what the lineup could potentially look like with what we kind of know with the Lightning roster. And even though it's kind of irrelevant now in a way, I mean, go back and also listen to the Armchair GM episode we did, because that also kind of ties in with things as well. All the way up until the McDonough trade, where that really kind of destroyed my Armchair GM. But with Motte, if going back, referencing our little episodes here, if Cirelli goes up to the first line and Paul goes up to the second, I would imagine that if Motte is brought back to Tampa Bay, that there would be a conversation had about him possibly playing on the third line. It's not something that is completely out of the realm of possibility for him, given during, I believe, his first stint in New York, and I think definitely his second stint with the Rangers, he had very good success playing on their third line and was a huge piece for them for the success that they had at that time, especially his second tenure there. And I think he's solid enough to play down the middle. And I think that, especially on a third line, and I think the only reason why he didn't, because on the fourth line this year is because really you had Glendening, who was just on another level. Then I think we could all agree that defensively, as well as face-off percentage, on a whole nother level, that what we saw from any center of this team, maybe outside of Anthony Cirelli defensively. But I'm willing to dabble around with the idea if John Cooper and co are comfortable with leaving Glendening on that fourth line, that the conversation could be had that Motte goes up to the third, just because he's a little younger. He maybe have a little bit more pep in his step. Obviously, I'm kind of pretty much jumping the gun here, but really that kind of ties into what we did see this season. He, just like Jeannot for the most part, was buried down on the fourth line all season long. And we all know by now, if those guys maybe played a line higher, we could have possibly seen maybe a little bit more oomph to their offensive game. There's obviously no guarantee there. And then also the question lies, what do you do with Esamont and Chafee there? How does that lay things out? And maybe how does that also change the fourth line, which I'll admit wasn't overly impressive this year to begin with. But taken, now that we've seen the season and, obviously what's done is done, I look at Motte, and it's unfortunate because, like I said throughout the course of the season, I had high expectations coming into the season that he was going to make some sort of impact offensively. It's just, I think it's a lot of it has to do with where he was in the lineup. Other guys in front of him in the lineup obviously needed to be in the positions that they needed to be in. The more unfortunate thing about Motte this season was obviously he missed a little bit of time. Like I said, only played 69 games, as well as there was games where, and maybe this is also kind of a good thing. It depends on how you view it. I kind of take this approach with defensemen mainly, unless they make spectacular plays. If you don't hear a guy's name throughout the course of a game, if he's a defenseman for the most part, or if you don't notice him, that means he's doing something right. Like I said, it's kind of a case-by-case dependency on that. But with Motte, that was kind of the case with him. You would go games, even weeks, without hearing his name. And I really maybe it was more so me. I had my hopes high, a little higher than maybe most did for him. So let me know in the comments below how you felt about his season. If I have to give his season a letter, it's going to be a C-, just because of, I think, the expectations I had, regardless if they were reasonable at all or rational. I do firmly believe, though, if the lineups are a little bit tweaked, I think that maybe he has a little bit of a better season. I'm sure some of you may give him maybe a C, maybe even a worse grade than I did. Let me know in the comments below what you think about that. And coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about next year. Is he going to be here? We talk about all that as he approaches the offseason as an unrestricted free agent. But before we get into that topic, I just want to remind you that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Now, summertime means baseball. The NBA Finals are here, as well as the Stanley Cup Final. And you could bet on all of it on FanDuel right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you could use to bet on everything from the NBA Finals MVP to who's going to hit it one out of the ballpark. I also use it to bet on horse racing. I bet on all of the Triple Crown races, and you can even bet on normal races. And the best part about the horse racing is that most of the horse races that you could bet on are televised on FanDuel TV. You could get it from the app. You could get it on your laptop. So check out that feature as well. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. If you want to reach out to the show, you go ahead and reach us at our social media accounts at LO_lightning on Twitter, LockedOn_lightning on Instagram, as well as you could reach out to me at DankyDank, DENKYD8NK. You can comment below this video as well if you're more comfortable with doing that. So we're talking about Tanner Janelle. We're talking about Tyler Motte, his season preview. Now, maybe looking back on my grade as well as the expectations for him, maybe my expectations were a little bit higher than most just because of I live in New York. When the Lightning are not on, I'm either watching Islanders or Ranger games or sometimes Devil games. And, what I saw him do with the Rangers, I even said at the time during his second tenure before he came over here, that I would have loved this guy on the team. He really is providing a little bit more of a dimension to them. And maybe that just had to do with how that team was constructed. You know what? If my expectations were a little bit higher than most, then that's on me. I disappointed myself. But were you disappointed? Let me know in the comments below. So we are now talking about this summer where obviously there's a lot of unknowns with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Is Stamkos going to come back? How are they going to fix their salary cap issues? Who are we going to see leave Tampa Bay? Tanner Janelle, Connor Sheary, Eric Chernak, one of those three or all three? But the other question that we have to answer now is with the number of UFAs that are leaving or at least off the books for now for Tampa Bay. One of them is Tyler Motte. He made a little over $800K last year. And when I look at his value and I look at what the salary cap is going to be next year and all the question marks looming around Tampa, I don't, I'm always willing to give someone a second chance if they underwhelmed in their first year in Tampa Bay, especially if it's if it's not going to be expensive. Players not named Vladislav Namestnikov. That was an absolute train wreck, as well as Connor Sheary this year. And if Tyler Motte comes back on an $800,000 deal, that's great. That would be phenomenal. Maybe sign him to a 1-year deal, $800K, and call it a day. He just turned 29 back in March, so that is the good thing as well. And so that's what I always like when I look at a player that you're either getting a free agency or kind of re-signing to a new contract is, it's always a plus if you get a player under 30 because, their legs are fresher. They could bounce back a little bit easier. Anybody who's 30 and over, yours truly, knows that sometimes that isn't the case with any sport or even a workout. And he's one of those guys that I do view, regardless of expectations, just from what I have seen from him in years past, whether it has been his time with Ottawa, Vancouver, the Rangers, you name it. I think that he's a guy, Columbus. I think that he's a guy that you could kind of mold into what you need him to be. And it kind of depends what happens this offseason in terms of what you need him to be. I think that if Stamkos doesn't come back and you bring back Motte, you bring back Duclair, I'm not even getting into the financials of it. If you're able to bring back him and you bring back Duclair and you kind of fit in the pieces everywhere else from players from Syracuse, I think you can live with him being on the third line. I think that especially if you have that young amount of players coming up, so you would have two forwards at least from Syracuse if you bring back Motte and Duclair, if Stamkos and Watson don't come back. And then possibly two defensemen from Syracuse coming up. I think you want some of that leadership a little bit higher, especially, you know, if you're going to keep if Glendening is still here, because like I've said on past episodes, who really knows what the Lightning are going to do? You know, who are they going to trade and whatever, you know, wherever the chips fall, they fall, and we're just going to have to deal with it. It might just be, you know, a bunch of salary cap dumps and the Lightning really don't get anything in return. And I could see Motte playing on that third line. I mean, you could also switch out him for Glendening. It's really dealer's choice at this point in time. I mean, I would prefer, especially if you're going to have a bunch of young guys up, let's say Jeannot is traded, and Motte goes up to the third with, this is all dependent on if you want to leave Duclair on that second line and you throw Cirelli up to the first with Point and Cooch, and Paul to the second with Duclair and Hagel. I think those are pretty good lines as well. And then you put Motte with Esamont and Chaffee. I think that's a good line. I think that's a line that could play physical as well as get you a few points, maybe a third of the time. And then you have Glendening kind of steering the ship with two rookies on his line. Koepke, who, like I said, I don't know why there's some of you that don't like him. I thought, you know, he played reasonably well for someone who didn't get really any of that much of a chance at the NHL level. And he had a phenomenal AHL playoffs. So I don't know why you wouldn't kind of take a chance on him riding that momentum into the summer and then into training camp, into the season. And then as for your winger on the fourth line, it kind of really depends on who you like the most in Syracuse. It could be Groshev, which I don't have a problem with. I thought Groshev played very well in the Calder Cup playoffs as well. You could always go with Boulay, you know, a player. I know a lot of people don't like Alexander Barre-Boulay, but he's a player that, he's been there before at the NHL level, so you kind of know what you're getting out of him to a certain extent. But I think the favorite will be Valtteri Morella. So that fourth line would probably, if I had to guess, if we're talking about a scenario that Stamkos does not come back, like I said, I mean, like I've said before, every day that goes by that we don't get a deal done or we don't hear about anything getting close to a deal, my assumptions about him not coming back get more and more concrete. And so I would have to say maybe you have Morella, Groshev, and Glendening on the fourth line. Like I said, with that leadership from with Glendening down the middle. And then you have Motte, Chaffee, and Esamont, which is not a bad line whatsoever. And I think that really, unfortunately, we won't know about a Motte deal until, if I had to guess, probably late in the summer. The only concern I have about him, and we'll talk about this in our final segment, the only concern I really have about Tyler Motte is that he gets injured a lot. He gets injured a lot. And that's not something that I think any of us really need or want to deal with. He's never played more than 74 games in a season. I mean, you do the math. He's played 8 years and he has 400 games. So whatever that averages out to per season. And, it's just one of those things that I'm sure the Lightning are keeping an eye out for and are in the back of their minds when they're trying to figure out where he fits into next season. So let me know. Do you think he comes back? Me, I'm hopeful. And we'll have to stick around for, like I said, probably won't hear anything really relatively about him until late in the summer. So wrapping things up on the show real quick, go ahead and follow us on social media, LO_Lightning on Twitter, Lockdown_Lightning on Instagram. You can give me a follow on Twitter at DankyDank, DENKYD8NK. You could also follow my other work at boltsbythebay.com. So real quick, what are our expectations for 24-25 for Tyler Motte? It's very easy. It's very simple. Stay healthy. I think I said the same thing about Eric Chernak, which, nobody would blame me if I did. Stay healthy. Lead by example on the third line. If he plays on the third line with Chaffee and Esamont, I would expect probably 30 points out of him. I would expect the face-off percentage to be decent. You're going to have to win a bunch of face-offs. His best in a season was 57.9. And that was through 58 games, and that was in 21-22. I mean, he had 1 year when he was like over 71.4. Yeah, so I would probably say, last year he was 50.3. If he could get to like at least 50, a little over that number, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I think that if he continues to play physical, he had 97 hits last year. If he continues to play physical, I think the points will come just playing on the third line with Esamont, Chaffee. I think Chaffee, like I said on the Chaffee episode, I think he's going to have a good season. I think Esamont's finally going to take a turn. We're going to see a lot of those chances that he missed this year and last year. He's going to finish a lot of those chances this year. I think this is kind of his grow up year. And I think Chaffee, there's going to be some rough parts about him. That's just the way it is with young guys. But that's why you have Motte, could kind of pick up the slack a little bit there. If you need to switch Motte out, throw him and put him on the wing and put Esamont down the middle, or even switch things around and, here and there throughout the course of games, put Esamont or Chafee on the fourth, preferably Chafee. You move Glendening up down the middle, and then you put Motte on the wing. That works too. So that's the good thing about Tyler Motte too, is that he could play down the middle and he could play on the wing for the most part. Preferably on the right side, just because he's a lefty. And, so that allows him to have that one-timer opportunity from that right circle. If it's there, if that's kind of something that you want to kind of experiment with. Obviously Motte not really known for his shot that much, but a guy that you could definitely play in front of the net that I think will get plenty of chances, especially with Esamont and Chafee, to clean up here and there. So let me know in the comments below, and it's going to be interesting. Like I said, I don't think we're going to see anything concrete with really any of the moves of this team until the NHL season is officially over and they kind of figure out what is going to happen with Stamkos. The other theory that I have that I think a lot of you agree with me with as well is that the Lightning, the reason why they're kind of taking so long and they're being mum about this whole Stamkos situation is because they're sending feelers out to other teams to see, do you want this guy? Do you want that guy? Hence the Tanner Jeannot rumors. They want to clear up space so they could have more space for cap space. Like I said on the last episode, I think that really the priorities right now are to sign Stamkos and Duclair, and then you could kind of live with filling in the pieces here and there. Especially with Motte, you have a cheap option there for one of your depth forwards, whether it be a bottom six guy or a guy that maybe you want to give a little bit more of a leash to on the third line. So let me know in the comments below how you feel, and we'll be back tomorrow with another episode. So that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.